that working? All right. Hey, my name is Jeff McIntosh. Really happy to be back here tonight. If I haven't met you before, I'm privileged to be on the pastoral team here and sometimes get to fill in for the lesson and be with everybody here. And I'm really happy to be back. You know, Trevor is on vacation with his family, and he asked me to come and give the lesson. And he said, pick a topic, which is always a little dangerous to do. But he said, so tonight I was thinking about praying about, I wanted to talk a little bit about boundaries, what they are and how they affect recovery, and look at a scripture that I think is really helpful for learning about having healthier boundaries. And all of us are in the process of learning how to set healthy boundaries throughout our life, different seasons, different relationships, different things. But when we talk about this subject, boundaries can be hard to define. Yet we all have them, right? Sometimes we're not aware of them until they've been crossed. I remember when I was in college, I had roommates kind of for the first time, and when you're living with three other guys, people cross each other's boundaries without even knowing it, right? It's the first kind of place you're out with people. And our college did a thing where seniors in high school would come and visit for a couple days, and they'd put on, try to get the kids to come to the college. And my three roommates they were all from the same town, and they wanted their friends from this small Christian school that they went to come and stay in our dorm. Now, I didn't mind if they were in there. I mean, I can share. It's okay. They could come, for a couple days. But I was out late the first night, and I came home to the dorm, and it's dark. Everyone's already asleep, and I'm stepping over people. I'm trying to be quiet. It's real dark. We have bunk beds, and I get over to my bunk bed, and I sit down on it, and then I kind of lean over and roll over, and I rolled over right next to a dude in my bed. And I kind of jumped, and it was dark, I was kind of scared, jumped and said, whoa, what are you doing in my bed, right? And woke everybody up and made the poor high school kid, kind of rebuked him out of my bed. It was gross. He was using my pillow, right? Ugh. Right. Now, I didn't think that I needed to explain to my roommates that one of my boundaries was no dudes in my bed. I didn't think I needed to explain that, but apparently I did. I still have that boundary, just in case you needed to know. Now, it's a silly illustration, but the importance of personal boundaries and relationships are both with yourself, your own boundaries with yourself and others, is an important area to grow in, to become healthier and healthier with. Henry Cloud, who's a psychologist and author, defines boundaries as one of the ways he starts to explain them in his book called Boundaries. He explains them as property lines. He likens them to property lines. So if you think of if you own a piece of property, there's a property line. Now, it may have a fence on it. It may not. It may have just, the surveyor spikes in the ground. But there is a line where your property ends, and everything on your side of it is your responsibility. And past that line on the other side is someone else's property. It's their responsibility. That's what they own. So everything on your side is what you own, and on the other side is somebody else owns that. So he uses that analogy, and he explains that boundaries, in a personal sense, in relationships, they're knowing what they are, they're communicating them, and it's following through with what you're willing or not willing to do in a relationship. That's what a boundary is. And Henry Cloud, he said it this way. He said, boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. That last sentence is really important. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. Boundaries are what allow for good things in relationships let good things into relationships, and they keep bad things out. So if you think of it as a property line, or another analogy that's used is a good boundary is like the front door on a house. Now, when the door is locked, it keeps things out, right? You can't get through it. keeps things out. If it's wide open, it lets anything can come in. But having healthy boundaries is when you know when and what to allow into relationships, or allow into your life, when you're in control of when you open the door or close the door. And it's important because learning how to open and close that metaphorical door wisely is a large part of your recovery, right? It's important to understand that having boundaries with people, with others, is not about getting other people to behave as you want. It's not a boundary. It's actually not what we're talking about. It's your property line. It's what you're responsible for. Some people get really confused when they're trying to set that because they think it's about fixing relationships and sometimes it leads to that, but that's not actually what a personal boundary is. Setting a boundary is about what you're willing or not willing to do in the relationship. My father, I've mentioned before on Monday nights, he could be a boundary crosser. He was an alcoholic. He was a functional alcoholic, and through the day he would get more and more alcoholic in his behavior. And we would go, when I was in my 20s, the kids were little, we would go over, often on Sunday afternoons, after church. He lived near the church we went to, so we'd go for dinners. And he had very strong opinions, and he liked to talk about politics. It wouldn't look like he was enjoying talking about politics when he would, and we had different politics. And he would try to engage with it. But as soon as I would start to engage, now I wanted to talk about things. I like ideas. I like talking about things. I like getting into that and thinking the pros and cons of things. That would have been great. I actually really wanted to have conversations with him. But he couldn't handle it. When he would, due to his drinking and due to his personality and due to his ears not working, he would inevitably devolve into name-calling, attacking my Christian values, attacking different things, and it would turn into a fight. So every time we would go there, now for a while I would try to figure out how I could say it just right, and then when that wouldn't work and I was kind of angry, I would poke at him, I would do little digs in the conversation just to get back at him, right? Trying to control it because I still wanted to connect with him that way, but he wasn't capable of it. And it kept ruining the visits. And I had to set a boundary with him and say, I'm not going to talk politics, Dad, anymore. We don't do good when we do this. I don't enjoy this conversation anymore. I don't want to talk politics anymore. And he would push it and say, well, Dad, I'll have to leave if this continues to happen. And I'd leave once or twice, but eventually we stopped. And every once in a while he'd shoot something off, but we'd stop, right? So it's a simple one. That's not terribly hard. But that was a boundary. Now, I stopped trying to control him by what I said, by how we did it, or trick him into having a conversation in some way by, verbal jujitsu. It didn't work. It wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the consequence. I had to set that boundary. Henry Claddy says it this way. He says, setting boundaries inevitably involve taking responsibility for your choices. You are the one who makes them. You are the one who must live with their consequences. And you are the one who may be keeping yourself from making the choices you could be happy with. We must own our own thoughts and clarify distorted thinking. Now that's from his book Boundaries, and the subtitle of that is When to Say Yes and When to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. Because if you think about it, right, your life is a collection of what you said yes to and what you've said no to. I was thinking about that, and it's interesting. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And anything beyond that is from the evil one. It says that's so important, that what we say yes to and what we say no to. And I think part of recovery is learning, obviously, what you should say yes to, what you should say no to. But what makes this hard sometimes is that in relationships, there is supposed to be sacrifice for other people. There is supposed to be going the extra mile sometimes. There is, wanting to be kind and graceful to others. And in fact, if you're a Christian, you're actually called to be like Jesus And he was obviously self-sacrificial, because sometimes that makes this confusing. Like, when is it a good time to set a boundary? When is it not? And we're called to be sacrificial like Jesus. So sometimes Christians struggle with the command to love your neighbor as yourself and how that's applied when it comes to setting boundaries. Because we are supposed to be forgiving and grace-giving and those kind of things. As an example, sometimes when I meet with people who have a loved one who maybe has substance abuse addiction and or other destructive habits, and the question comes to, what is actually help? What is actually enabling, right? And that's not always easy to discern at first. That can take some time to kind of figure out what's helpful or not. But I do think there's a scripture that gives us some principles that helps with questions like that, and also questions of when is it time to hold a strict boundary with someone, and when is it time to be grace-giving with people. So we're going to look at Galatians 6, verses 1 through 5. And it says this: "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks that they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load." So this is found in the last chapter of Galatians, written by the Apostle Paul. And the book is it's written by him to that church in Galatia. It's one of his earlier letters that he wrote. And he's spends the first argument of the book talking about the difference between law and grace, and how through Jesus Christ we don't live by law, and we're not saved by the many good things we do, but by the grace of God and what he did on the cross for us. And then he teaches that we're now, because of that grace, to live by the Spirit, by the Holy Spirit, which is transforming our character to be like Christ. And we're to lean into that, depending on his grace. And then in chapter 6, he starts to apply those truths. And in our passage, he speaks to the responsibilities that believers have to each other, when to help and when they're to help themselves. And these principles very much apply to recovery. So look at verse 2 again. It says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you fulfill the law of Christ." Now, the law of Christ, he's talking about Jesus' general teaching, but he's talking about the golden rule, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Love others the way you'd want to treat others the way you'd want to be treated. And he's saying, carry each other's burdens, and you fulfill that. Now, the word burden is translated from a Greek word, which means a weight that cannot be lifted by one person. It's a way of translating what the word means. Now, there are circumstances in life, right, that are this kind of burden, where the things that we need help with, we can't fix ourselves. Now, this could be situations that are out of control, might not, from things that happen to us. We can be in situations like that. And I think that the principle still applies there of helping each other carry those type burdens. But Paul is it's a little more specific on the kind of burdens that we're to help others carry. And I think they applied really well to recovery. If we look at verse 1 again, it says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently, but watch yourselves or you may be tempted." Now, the type of burdens specifically he's addressing are the consequences of sins or character defects or poor boundaries have led to a person being caught. Now, I think when I read that, sometimes it's probably just because I have a guilty conscience, but I read it like, the word caught is, "Ha, got you doing it," right? Like catching the person. That's what I think when I read that, but it's not actually. It's much more like being caught in a trap, like if you stepped in a bear trap, right? And in a sense, if you think of like entangling sins, right, or character issues that we have, we can get caught into it. We can feel caught or trapped when we fall in and given in to a poor boundary or temptation or a pattern of certain things where we're stuck. And that's more of what that word means. And the verse is very clear that we're to carry each other's burdens and that a spiritual person is needed for that person to be restored, or multiple people. That people who have experienced the grace of God are to come alongside someone with that and help them get out of that situation. And it speaks to boundaries in the sense because some people have a boundary issue of never letting anyone help them carry their burdens. When I start talking about, usually we think of boundary issues as, weak boundary issues where, people let other people walk all over them. They always say yes, they never say no, and we'll get to that. But it works the other way too. If boundaries are like a property line, like a door that we open or can be locked, some people's boundary issues are they don't have a door, they have fortresses. That they try to carry everything themselves. They have the I'm fine boundary. How you doing? I'm fine. What's you sure? You look like you're carrying something really heavy there. No, I'm fine. I can do it myself. Right? And they're carrying around things like grief or insecurity, trauma, guilt, false beliefs, hidden addictions, and they keep saying to themselves and others, I'm fine, I can do it myself. That's a boundary issue. This verse is saying that if you're caught in a sin, that you're stuck with that you're carrying these heavy things, you need others to help carry that. Some things can't be carried yourself. The verse is clear that the people can be caught like in a trap and they need to get out. They need help getting out of that by spiritual people. People living by the Spirit, it says. Again, even in the context we can see this isn't people who are full of themselves. These are people who have received the grace of God that I mentioned that all of Galatians is built up to, and they're keeping in step with the Spirit. They're nothing. And in the passage that we read, Paul keeps saying, don't fall yourself, stay humble, right? This isn't people that are full of themselves, just people that are a little bit further ahead or currently aren't in a trap themselves so they can help. And this is nothing new to people in recovery, right? This is the whole program. Because people who are further along in recovery, who have, a good amount of time, they've let other people who have also worked a spiritual program help them along the way, and they're returning the favor and helping each other carry the burdens that come up. Look at this picture, what the Amish do when they're moving a barn. Right? I think there was 300 of them. And, that's probably tens of thousands of pounds, right, that they carry. And you can watch videos of this where they move it across a property. Now, obviously one person couldn't lift that, but if enough people come around, they can lift it and they walk it up a hill. It's pretty cool to watch. And in a sense, recovery's kind of a team sport, right? You need others and they need you. You can't have, I'm fine, I'll do it myself, if your personal boundaries are too closed, if that's the case. So ask yourself, if you have closed boundaries, is your door always locked? Are you letting others in? Do you share in small group? Do you have a sober supports you can call? Do you call? Collecting the numbers are good, but using it and calling is better, right? Seeking a sponsor, right? Sponsoring others if you're ready for that. Seeking help, going to a counselor if you need that, to help lift burdens that you might be caught with. So that's one side of that, of how that affects boundaries. So someone with healthy boundaries, they're open to the right things and closed to the wrong things. They learn to take responsibility for what they're supposed to carry themselves, and they ask for help on what they can't. And Paul goes right into this. So we look at verse 5, he says, for each one should carry their own load. It's interesting because he starts by saying, help each other carry each other's burdens. But then he goes right back over to this. He says, each one should carry their own load. He just told others to help, and then he says this. And again, the root word in the Greek helps us to understand what he's getting at. So the word for load there can be translated, kind of the root words can be translated as like the idea of a cargo on a ship, or what someone would carry in a pack. And it seems Paul's using the word picture of a boat, what a boat is capable of carrying, right? So cargo. Now think about that. You don't want to overload a boat, right? It'd be dangerous. It's past its limits. It'd be dangerous sinking. But with sailboats, you can't sail them if you don't have enough weight in there. So it's like saying if it's true, an empty ship is a danger of capsizing as well. So Paul is saying that each person has a load or responsibility that they're capable of carrying that they need to carry as well. So you can't, when our boundaries are messed up, sometimes we don't know what we're supposed to carry, and we're always trying to place our regular load on other people. And part of recovery is learning what's actually our responsibility, what things we're supposed to be responsible for and carry. Now, some people have weak boundaries, and they carry other people's responsibilities and to the point of enabling. Or sometimes people haven't learned to take responsibility for their load, and they expect others to carry that. So you have to learn what only you can do for yourself. I think in recovery, you have to learn that only you can work it, right? Only you can work your recovery. You can't put it on other people. Now, they're there to help carry the burden, and there's people available for that. But you have to take the initiative. They can't want it more than you. You have to want to do it for yourself, and you have to ask for that. You have to ask for help. It's on you to seek it. You have to make the call. And I think another area is learning to say no is important if that's hard for you. Other people will never say no for you. If you say yes, but you really mean no, they don't know that. And most people are terrible mind readers. I don't know if you've figured that out yet, but you're all terrible psychics. But and that's really important, because when people have a hard time saying no, they're very bitter. And usually it's because they're very sensitive, and usually it's because they don't ask for a lot from other people. And they think to themselves, how can you be asking me for this right now when you know I have to say yes? Well, who said you had to say yes? And that's due to different beliefs that people have that keep them stuck with unhealthy boundaries. So let's look at a few of them that need to be challenged when we're figuring out what's the appropriate amount of closed and the appropriate amount of openness. So one false belief that leads to unhealthy boundaries would be the belief that other people's feelings are my responsibility. Or the inverse, my feelings are other people's responsibility, right? That's a very unhealthy way of looking at it, because responsibility is the important word there. Now, do we want to be considerate of other people's feelings? Yes. Should we care about other people's feelings? Yes. Should we be a jerk? No. That's not what I'm talking about. But the word responsibility is ownership. You have to own your own feelings, and other people are responsible to own their own feelings. Healthy people understand each of us responsible for our feelings. They set boundaries and relationships based on how they believe they should be treated, and not based on how it's going to upset or not upset the other person, right? And these are connected. The next one would be how others feel about me determines my value. If people hold to that false belief, it's easy to fall into people-pleasing. It's easy to say yes when it'd be better for you to say no. When I was working with people that had a hard time when I was doing outpatient treatment, most of the clients smoked cigarettes, and we gave them smoke breaks a few times during the day. And so you'd take them out in the courtyard, and they would smoke, and they'd always be bumming cigarettes off each other, right? Like that was the big thing. And I would tell them that when people were trying to work on their boundaries, that was always my first assignment. I said, you're not allowed to give a cigarette to anybody when they ask for one. Like, that is so mean. They're going to be so upset with me. It's like, well, do you have a job? No. Can you afford these pack of cigarettes that you have? No. I would always tell them you should quit, first of all, but you're not gonna. Then then you really can't afford to share it, can you? No, right? So they're going to be disappointed, but will they live? Yeah, right? So it was hard because they had to learn to be okay with the other person's disappointment because the other person is actually responsible for their disappointment. You guys do not have a right to not be disappointed in relationships. Now, I'm not saying harmed. That's different, right? But your feelings can be hurt and you're not harmed. You're actually not harmed by hurt feelings. You're harmed by abuse and stuff like that, but that's different, right? So other people, everyone is responsible for their own feelings and what they do with it, how they cope with them, those kind of things. So again, this comes from beliefs that saying no to a loved one is mean or harmful. This leads people to people pleasing. Jesus said no to people all the time, and he never sinned. Jesus disappointed people so much they wanted to kill him, and he never sinned. Now, I don't think he was a jerk about it. I don't think he was mean about it. But he was doing what the Father had called him to do. And when other people tried to force them into their box, he would say no in different ways, either by behavior or his words and different things. It is not mean to say no to somebody or for someone to say no to you. And then the next one related would be, I fear I'll be abandoned if I say no. If you say yes in that circumstance because you fear abandonment, you're not actually saying yes out of generosity. You're saying it out of fear, right? And that's not actually loving. We're called to be loving. So we want to say yes because we can say yes. Sometimes that's sacrificial. That's different. If I'm going to put myself out for somebody because I'm motivated by love, it's okay to say yes in that situation, even if it's stretching you real thin. But if you're saying yes, but you actually want to say no, and you should say no for yourself, that's not healthy. Next one, if someone's upset with me, I feel guilty. You probably learned this from you did learn, if that's a common belief for you, then you've learned this from other unhealthy relationships. But the truth is you're only guilty if you've actually done something wrong, right? Just because they're upset doesn't mean they're right. Just because you're upset doesn't mean they're right. That's a hard one, because when we're upset, we think we're right. But just because you're upset, you're not right. Jesus is your judge, right? He actually sees all. So if you know you're not being mean, you're not doing something against somebody, but you're holding a boundary, just because they're upset, you don't need to feel guilty. You're not responsible for their feelings or reactions. And this goes in the last one, anger makes a person wrong. No, not necessarily. Or anger makes a person right. It kind of fits with the last one. That's not true. Anger tells us that we're upset about something, but whether the behavior is right or not is the issue. So healthy boundaries are determining in a relationship what you're willing and not willing to do. Now, this isn't easy. And it's good to have a recovery team, to have people around you, people you can bounce things off of when you're not really sure, because these things get complicated. But it's not trying to control the situation of the other person. It's just what is the right thing for me to do. And I would say that learning to set healthy boundaries is a process. I do recommend a book by Henry Cloud called Boundaries. It's a whole book, so this takes practice. And I would say that knowing that when you set a boundary, it's not set in stone. Things can change. You can get a different perspective. The relationship can change. Know that about that. But the point is that you're in control of the door, and you're learning how to open it and close it when needed. So that's the recovery tool tonight, is just for you to examine any boundaries that you might need to set with yourself, or maybe in relationships. But I would say, carefully weigh that, figure out the kindest way to set it and to communicate it if that needs to happen. But again, it's not about controlling the other person. It's about what am I willing and not willing to do for you, Lord, before you, doing the right thing. So here's some small group questions. So if you want to take a picture of these for your small group. I'd say share if you've ever if it's ever been hard for you to let others help carry your burdens in recovery. How do you overcome that? Next one is share a time when you said yes when you wanted to say no out of fear that led to resentment. How have you improved your ability to say no out of self-care? And then 3, share something you've taken responsibility for that was not your responsibility, not your load, that added to your hurts, habits, or hang-ups. Share how giving that responsibility back helped your recovery. So, have a great small group, guys. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Pastor Jeff. Okay, so I was a boundary mess when I first started recovery, right? And I would not have been able to get where I am without this community. But I just want to say very quickly, I had a significant person in my life who was an alcoholic. And when I first tried to start setting boundaries, I set massive boundaries that I was not ready for. It was like, hey, you have to stop drinking right now. That's not going to happen, okay? And then those got smaller and smaller and smaller. It was like, you're not going to drink around me. You're not going to drink in the house. Okay, pick 2 days a week that you can drink. And all that did was harm me and teach that person that I was not serious and that they could do whatever they wanted to do. And keeping with the house analogy, I just would say I was going to close the door, but it was wide open. And that entity filled my house until I was so small and so quiet that I just couldn't breathe. And then I finally picked up the phone and I called my sponsor and she said, set a boundary. It's so small that you know you can do it. So I could not control him. I couldn't do anything about his actions, but I knew I could say, all right, if this happens around me, I can step away. I can walk out of the room. And that was my very first small boundary. And it was just like, she also told me, are you going to start weight training with a 75-pound weight? No, you're going to start with 10 pounds, right? Build that muscle. So start small and then build up to the bigger boundaries, okay? Don't overwhelm yourself. So that was my takeaway and one of my biggest blessings and word of advice. And I met that person in small group. So go to small group so you can too meet that person. So I'm going to